Welcome in, everybody. Welcome to another exciting deck tech here. Today we have our friend from CEDH Network, Dan. He's bringing us probably the most spicy deck tech we will probably ever have here on the show.
Oh, 100%.
100%. This deck was featured in episode 7 of the Dorks, so if you guys haven't watched that, go back, go check that out. That is a banger episode. Also, make sure that you're following both me and Dan. All the links are going to be in the bio, not the bio, the description down below. You know what I meant, YouTube. Anyways, Dan, how are you today?
I'm fantastic, dude. I had a great day. Took the kids out to the Science Museum up here, and I'm ready to get back into my magic zone now. I go from like dad to magic on a daily. As soon as I hit like 8 o'clock and the kids go to bed, the magic comes back out.
You're like a freaking werewolf, you know, like we transform.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So can you introduce the deck and tell us what makes it unique?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite decks. Okay, so I know he said I was CDH Network, but I still do play casual. But now when I think about casual decks, it's from a totally different perspective. I basically scrapped all my casual decks that were like kind of more normalized game plans. Like, for instance, I had like a werewolf deck that basically just did werewolves, but it just wasn't enough zest, you know? So now when I do casual decks, I just want to surprise people or do something totally off the cuff. So for that example, we have today for you some good Christian magic. This deck is a vanilla creature typal deck helmed by Jasmine Boreal of the 7. If you guys haven't had the pleasure of seeing this before, Jasmine is an absolutely insane card. At base, it effectively makes all of your vanilla creatures, so vanilla creatures being creatures with no abilities, effectively unblockable. They can't be blocked except by other creatures without abilities. She also adds a little bit of mana, just bang for your buck. She can make a green and white, but only to be spent on creatures with no abilities. So that gets you a basic idea of where we're going with the deck, since we are doing a commander-centric build. But it's primarily just vanilla creatures, and you would think that doesn't sound like a fun time, but honestly, I've had the most fun with any of my casual decks just with this deck alone. I could get into it, but I'm sure we're going to get into some questions, so I'll leave some of the zest.
Awesome. Yeah, vanilla is definitely the finest of the flavors, chat. So, like, what is the general strategy behind the deck? Are there any particular synergies? I know we have the vanilla theme going on. Is there anything special that's popping out in this?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, obviously the first thing, the strategy is just play fatties and then get in for free because of our commander. So obviously here we have 26 creatures. I'm sorry, there it is. 26 creatures, and every single one of them in the deck have no abilities. Absolutely all of them. This was important to me as like a thematical practice. In the new bracket system, I actually thought this would be a 1, but it got a 2. I guess I have a couple spicy cards in it, but effectively I'm a purist, right? So there are some creatures that function with vanillas that kind of increase their abilities, but to me that was going too far off the cuff to stick on the theme. So every single one of these guys have no abilities. But the basic strategy is to get some of these out, and you would be surprised how powerful even just one guy like this, which I from our game, I'm gonna have to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? This guy is Grook's Gorehorn. He's just a 5 mana 7/3 vanilla, right? Also, as a side note, this is one of my favorite cards because if you see it on screen here, it is the only card in Magic that has a text box but no text. Isn't that nuts? I've never seen anything like it. When I was holding it in my like real life physical hands, it obviously looks like a misprint, and this is what it actually looks like, and it's hot. I love it. But enough of that. Effectively, you kind of underestimate how powerful these creatures are when you imagine that their text box literally says unblockable. A 5 mana 7/3 unblockable is such a huge threat. And it doesn't feel like it on the surface, but every single one of the creatures is effectively the same thing. So when you're playing these guys at rate and they keep printing things that are even more value for the rate, right? Because of power creep. Like we just recently got this Tarian card, right? The World Tyrant from Aether Drift, which is a 9/7 for 5 mana. Which, again, if you're imagining it as a 5 mana 9/7 with unblockable, that's a lot of power. So that's our main game plan. We can play creatures on curve at ridiculous rates for their power toughness text box, and then they basically get unblockable. And having that much damage in a single swing to threaten the table allows you to do a lot of kind of cantilevering and politics throughout the gameplay, since you can threaten the most damage, usually of anybody at the table, with creatures that don't do anything, right? Sorry, was there another part to your question? I'll give you a clip there,
it was
I ramble.
No, you got it all. Trust me there.
Okay. Sick.
Awesome. I mean, so, considering that all of your creatures are vanilla, they don't do anything. How does your like when I think of like the most important thing to like building a deck, first off, right, is like a mana base, right? How does your mana base work in your deck? Is there any specific lands that you rely on that may benefit a vanilla creature, or maybe just something that you're happy to have in the deck?
That's a great question. And now I'm remembering that your other question also included some special synergies. So I'll go back and touch on that. Yeah, I'll touch on that right after we talk about the lands real quick. Now, land-wise, ironically, not really, right? But I will show it off because my deck has a secret that we'll get to eventually. But everything in the deck is fully pimped out, foiled and brand of variants. So on the Mox field here actually shows my different land variants that I have, which is a cool thing I didn't know you could even do on Mox Field when I was kind of a younger brewer. So these are actually the specific forest treatments and everything that I have in the deck. There's nothing that particularly synergizes with what I'm doing per se, but I guess a point I would make specifically is that the majority of the deck, if I go scroll back up and you pay attention to it, is green, right? But I need white specifically to be able to play Jasmine Boreal, right? Getting the commander out is quintessential. And then there are a couple other cards sprinkled in there that I actually want white for. But when you have a deck that's like 90% one color, 10% the other, it gets a little tricky because you can't just go 90-10 in your land base. You have to pay attention to your curve and when you're going to deploy certain pieces. So I want to get my commander out ASAP, which means I need to have a white source kind of effective immediately, even though I want hardly any white sources throughout the course of the game. As a result, you'll see that the land base here kind of looks like more of a competitive land base. I'm using a lot of duels, a lot of things like I do have the fetch in here to be able to fetch up some dual lands like the Temple Garden and the new Surveil lands like Lush Portico. I have the Hushwood Verge, things like that. This seems basic, but again, it's such an important part of the deck to be able to color fix like this. Of course, we have Homeward Path because people stealing our creatures really sucks. That's the basics of our deck there. Demolition Field because it's the absolute spiciest land in casual, period, point blank. I do have a Boseiju, mainly because I don't have a lot of just generic interaction in the deck. So even though this is a stronger card in a general sense, this does take one of my removal slots. So when doing my kind of dissection of how much removal do I want in the deck, this is not in addition to, this is one of them, right? So like I'll sacrifice a piece of removal if I really need this as a land, if that makes any kind of sense. And then going back to your other question,
back to the synergies, right?
Yes, some additional synergies. The rest of the deck kind of is that, right? So there's a couple things to note right off the bat. I guess we're here in enchantments, but effectively, because I can't grant my creatures abilities, right? Like people have asked me like, oh, why no Lightning Greaves, right? Things like that. But that sneakily grants abilities to my creatures. It would grant haste, which then makes it no longer vanilla, which kind of de-synergizes with my deck. So ways that I power up my board, as opposed to being with granting abilities, I just grant more power, right? So things like the Muraganda Petroglyphs, this specifically is for creatures with no abilities. It just gives them a +2/+2 Anthem, right? Which you think is not the strongest, but again, we're all unblockable. Our biggest threat is the amount of damage we can just put on board, and cards like this are super strong with that in mind. Otherwise, we are then kind of jumping from that point to working with our increased power. Again, we're playing cards that at rate have higher powers than people would expect, and we're buffing them up. So we can expertly benefit off of cards like the Skull Spore Nexus and the Great Henge, which I know people are gonna shudder when they see the Great Henge, but do mind you, this is a deck with 26 creatures that don't do anything, so we do need to run some powerful cards to kind of offset the power down and keep us where we want to be in terms of competitiveness. But Skull Spore is actually kind of a more interesting card in the deck, in my opinion. This one functions like the Great Henge's sister, if you will, still with the power reduction. But this one then creates the non-token creatures when my creatures die that gain the base power toughness equal to the power, and those are vanilla creatures. So as some of you wise people might have already thought of, tokens are really cool in this deck, although I don't make a lot of them because they are vanilla, in most of them at base, right? Including this one here. And then I get to double powers, where when you double a 7 power creature that's unblockable to a 14 power creature that's unblockable, that's nearly half of somebody's life. You know what I mean?
It's scary.
Now, it's probably worth mentioning because I
was just about to say we have it on screen because I actually have a question. I was going to ask, are there any unappreciated or unexpected cards that you've included and why? And I think we see it here. Go ahead, talk about the super secret tech.
Okay. So I gave a little bit of the spoiler away, sorry there guys, but I do run a Rule 0 card in here. It's one, I think this is the Unhinged, it might be Unglued, I don't remember the differentiation, but I run Super Secret Tech. Now, there's a bit of a story time with it, so I can give you just the little synopsis of why I really run it, but what the card is, if you haven't seen it before, it's a lot of fun. It's a 3-mana artifact. It has a reflective effect, so it affects everybody at the table. It's kind of like a global artifact in that sense. All premium spells cost 1 less, and all premium creatures get +1/+1. So this is a global anthem and a global cost reducer for premium. Now, what does premium mean? Back in the day, it would have mainly meant foils. Nowadays, I usually house rules it to mean alternative treatments. So if you have something like a different language or an alternative art, even if it's not foil or shiny and pretty, I like all the foils, right? So all of my cards in this deck apply to Super Secret Tech. So it gives me a little bit of parity breaking. It's a little stronger for me than my opponents, but it's a lot of fun. It kind of does that group huggy thing, very, very soft core, where it's like affecting the game globally and giving people a little bit of bonus, but I'm not going overboard. So it does dramatically impact the game, but it doesn't totally skew the game to like a point of ridiculousness where we're all drawing like 20 cards a turn, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Continue.
So like the random little story of why I actually include this is basically back in the day. And listen, guys, I've played Commander/Magic for forever. I played Commander when it was Elder Dragon Highlander, when it was first being created. I had a garbage Scion the Air Dragon deck. It was a lot of fun. During that window of time, I played with one of my friends very frequently, and we decided to spice things up because we were getting bored. We would both build complete undecks. So we bought a bunch of the cards and we decided who would get what colors. And I ended up with green-white at the time, and I went with a Super Secret Tech build, right? And my commander was Jasmine Boreal, because we thought, hey, let's pick a commander that's like super bad so it would be funny. So I picked Jasmine Boreal because she is a legendary 5 mana 4/5. Not even a 5/5. Couldn't even be like tit for tat, right? I thought it'd be hilarious, so that's the one I ran with as my commander, and the whole deck was foiled, and I ran Super Secret Tech. Years and years down the line, somehow I'm still playing this game. Who knows? I'll probably play it till I die. They release Jasmine Boreal the 7, a commander that actually synergizes with the old commander. So it kind of felt like fate that I had to build this deck, and I wanted to include one little shout back to that original build. That's why I usually Rule 0 the Super Secret Tech. If people don't want to play with it, y'all, if you run into that in your play group, the deck is prepared to deal with that. You can just put in the replacement card that's what's sitting down here in the sideboard. It's wedding announcement. So always, before you play this deck, if you decide to build it, go ahead and do that Rule 0 and say, hey, there's an uncard. I do have a replacement. If anybody wants me to use it, that's fine. And then just switch them out. But that's the story time. It's a super fun card. I definitely recommend you try it. It's a lot of fun.
All right. So now for some fun questions here. What's the best advice you could give someone who wants to build a similar deck to this?
Ooh, a similar deck. Well, it's such a unique kind of concept, right? I think that at its core, the 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 main thing about this deck that I would say, if you're looking to build a similar deck, what you're trying to do is you're trying to manipulate power level, right? Like, this is my deck where I want to be able to play this against pretty much any opponent, right? So I know that if I played against like a high power deck, like if we're talking about new brackets, if I'm in bracket 4 or something, obviously this is CDH aside, this is not a CDH deck, but if I'm in bracket 4, I might get dumped on. But the cool thing about it is I can deploy things that are such a 0 level threat that nobody pays attention to you at all, right? If you play your cards right, you can deploy a bunch of vanilla creatures which are completely irrelevant. You don't even have to cast your commander right away, which obviously unveils the threat of unblockability. But if you are kind of yucking it up, right, and you drop a 5/5 and it's not doing anything, you can have a lot of fun. It's also reciprocal fun, right? Because the table usually super enjoys it. Then you can come out and be a huge threat when all of a sudden they become unblockable and you have lethal on board. Or you drop something like unnatural growth, right, and just double up your board all of a sudden, and it's like, oh shit, you know, like damage went to 20 and now I'm dead, right? Or you drop something like classic haymaker cards like Azuri's Predation, which not only is going to do a board wipe, right, a one-sided board wipe for you in most cases, but it's also going to generate you an army of 4/4s, which are vanilla creatures, right? So if you were going to build a deck like this, I think the spirit of this deck is all about that, right? It's about engaging in fun, about trying to give somebody a kind of shock value or unique experience, and trying to really play across the brackets so that you can pull this out and feel like you won't necessarily step on anybody's toes, regardless of any Rule Zero conversation. I can restrain my power, I can expand my power. This deck allows you to do a lot. You might lose, but it's one of those decks, right, where the joy of playing a deck like this is exactly that. It's for the fun of it, right? This is a power bracket 2. This is a lower tier deck. So I'd recommend for brewing decks like that to just have that focus in mind. And if you're brewing a deck that is a little underpowered, like with the creature package we have here, I would also recommend including a couple like quote unquote game changers, or what I would necessarily kind of prescribe that way, like the Great Henge, right? And don't feel too bad about it, because a lot of times these super fringe strategies, the super fringe ones, do need a couple cards that are kind of going to push them above and beyond. I wouldn't necessarily run cards that warp the strategy, right? It'd be hard to describe that, right? Like, how would I signify that? I'm trying to think about the game changers, but I guess it's easier to just talk about the Great Henge. Great Henge isn't actually warping your strategy at all. It's just giving you the mana advantage and card advantage so that you can kind of keep up there with the big dogs, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sick.
One last question before we pack it up here. Are there any future cards or sets that you're excited to see that you think might fit well in this deck? Anything coming up from the future sets?
That's a great question. I think that the things I'm most excited about are usually new vanillas, obviously, although that's a very like lame thing to say. But we just in Aether Drift got the Gibrick Omnivore, which seems so lame, but it's a 2-mana 3/2 with a cute flavor text that actually is a phenomenal rate. So it makes me excited anytime I see that. Obviously, the legendary vanilla cycle was insane. I already talked about it with the Tyrion. I was like, oh dude, what are the odds, right? They just released this Quake Strider Ceratops too, which is a 6-mana 12/8. That was back in Foundations. So anytime like a vanilla gets printed and it kind of sneaks under the radar for most people, for me, it's like Christmas. But other than that, I would say, like, again, back with the synergy function, anytime they release things that kind of care about a creature's power, I get to really think about its versatility within my shell, right? Like Hunter's Insight is another card that, like, I draw cards based on the amount of damage that was dealt to an opponent, obviously with my unblockability and power-based strategies. The more power I have, the more damage I'm dealing, the more cards I'm drawing. So anything that can synergize with power, like Skullspore Nexus when they printed that, incredible. Those cards are probably the things I like the most. Cream of the Crop is an old school one. But I'm excited about Tarkir for this deck because I'm assuming that there's going to be some big fat creatures. And a lot of times when they do dragon-based decks, there are things that like to see power. Obviously, if it's going like full typal and everything says dragon on it, I might be a little SOL. But I'm kind of excited to see if they do give me a bone and have some more kind of like power-based synergies.
Here's the looking for that big green vanilla dragon that we're hoping for.
I'll take it, dude.
A good old 10-10 vanilla dragon, yeah.
There's a couple of these guys that still got to get out of here, dude. I know I played Colossopede in our gameplay, but
yeah,
it's just a 5-mana
5/5. But
every time they you get it. Every time they print a new guy who's like a 5-mana 9/7, I start to get like really embarrassed about these like just like completely on rate guys. As a send off. Right, like the one other thing I want to mention is flavor texts. It's so fun. Like reading the flavor text of cards. Like I didn't have as great an appreciation for it as I did once I built a deck where obviously the text box doesn't do anything else. So there's so many flavor texts in this build. If you go and actually check out the deck, that are just like subtly hilarious and really cool. I really like Enormous Baloth. If you humor me, I'll read it real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
It says its diet consists of fruits, plants, small woodland animals, large woodland animals, woodlands, fruit groves, fruit farmers, and small cities. Which is like, I don't know, it's just a nod to design, and I love when they get creative with these flavor texts, especially on vanilla guys. It's the only thing to do, right? So like they get a little cheeky in these, and it's a lot of fun to read. But pay attention to your flavor text, and your opponents will have to, right? Like every time you cast a creature, here's my favorite move. And when I'm playing this deck, I cast a creature. I don't say, I just say its name. Everybody goes like this. You know, they lean in. They go to try to read it like we usually do when you're not familiar with the card. And I'm like, there's nothing there. Don't worry about it. Lean back, cowboy. It's the same old pure vanilla.
Awesome. The deck is brilliant. Honestly, I loved playing against it on the show. I'm pretty sure you wiped me out like super early with an unblockable huge creature.
Honestly, dude, I felt so bad.
I forget. I think I might have been. I think I might have been playing dinosaurs there, and I thought, you know,
you were.
I was like, I got big creatures, but they can't block because they're not vanilla.
Oh, you had Zakama out, right? Like, so yeah. I was like, oh no, like that's gonna get rid of my whole board, and I was kind of the biggest threat at the moment. So I was like, oh, I have to just let Denied take like a 2-hour turn.
Yep.
And get ready.
But thank you again for coming on and showing the deck. It is really great. And I'm assuming, I shouldn't assume, but budget-wise, not super expensive considering the vanilla creatures.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's in the screen cap, but specifically because I did the like pimp out, it is actually on Moxfield right now. It says it's $1,258. but it actually is pretty budget. If you are a budget player, here's what I would say, right? Like the vanilla creatures are nothing, right? You could pimp them out if you want, like I did, and a couple of them might ring you a few extra dollars. Like this Gigantosaurus, I think I got it for like $10 or something, right? But you don't have to do that, and there's versions that are cheaper for sure, even with still doing the like all foils. Otherwise, take out super secret tech and make this thing non-foiled. That's totally fine. It's kind of like my story anyway. I think it's a lot of fun if you can go for it, but if you're a budget player, take that out, get your vanillas, and then just take out some of the bomb cards and you'll be good. Obviously, like one of the things is Ring of the Money. I have this version of the Soul Ring because I picked up that secret layer. It's a $94 card, right?
Yeah.
Like, and Great Henge, I happen to have the foil. I actually opened this when I opened my Wilds of Eldraine box, and I never got rid of it, and now it's a $90 card, right? So when you hear that price tag, it's super conflated. And I've just been a collector for like decades. But yeah, it's super budget. That's what I would recommend, guys. Like take out the Great Henge if you want to go budget. Take out some of these other like super expensive cards and defoil the thing and take out Super Secret Tech, and you're good to go. And when I say take out the expensive cards, there's like maybe like 5 to 10, and like that's a pretty easy swap. And if you don't know what to put in more vanillas. It can't hurt, baby.
You can never go wrong with more vanillas. All right. Thank you again for showing us the deck. We are going to put all of your links down below in the description below. Thank you guys for watching another episode of our deck tech here. And we're hoping to have Dan on the show again pretty soon.
Yeah, dude.
And maybe he can bring something fancy, like he did with the.
I got just the one, dude. I brewed it just for you.
Oh, did you?
I'll be back on. Don't worry.
I'm excited. I'm very excited. All right, everybody. We will see you later. Thank you guys for coming out and watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow Dan on everything. Make sure you follow the Man of Dorks everywhere. And we will see you in another episode. I love you guys. Mwah. Kisses. Bye-bye.